Makahanya haramita shingyo Ganji saiboza gyojin hanya haramita jishoken gon gai gudo esai gu yaku shari ji shiki fui gu fui.
A monk asked, "Why does the Master say that heart is Buddha?" The Master replied, "To stop the crying of little children." "When the crying has stopped, what then?" asked the monk. "No heart, no Buddha," replied the Master. "And what to teach someone who is beyond these two?" asked the monk. "To him I would say, it is not a thing," replied the Master. "When suddenly encountering such men, then what?" asked the monk. "I would then teach the understanding of the great Tao," answered the Master. This is an excerpt from Encounters with Master Mazu, known in Japanese as Baso, or Basu Doitsu, and this comes from another section of the Records of the Transmission of the Lamp, Volume 2, which we've been serializing for a number of months now on the Zen Gateway. This exchange between a monk and Master Baso is a famous one and appears a number of times. I can think of one other example. For example, in Wisdom of the Zen Masters, the story appears too. In there it is slightly different. And first of all, to understand that Baso Doitsu himself came to his own insight from this phrase, heart is Buddha, or the ordinary heart is Buddha. And really, perhaps if we just go into that a little bit, because obviously this is an important saying. Not only did Baso Doitsu come to his own insight via this saying, but also he brought many other people to insight through it as well. The ordinary heart is Buddha, or this heart is Buddha, or simply heart is Buddha. And that term heart, again, just to remind ourselves, is a translation of what was originally a Sanskrit word, chitta. In Chinese, the word is shin, and as for example in Shingyo, the Heart Sutra, for example, which is chanted in Zen monasteries and temples, and in Japanese, the term is kokoro, and all of them refer to the same thing. And originally in English, this was translated as the word mind, with a capital M, and in older Buddhist texts, older Buddhist books on Buddhism in English, we come across this word mind with a capital M. And it was a word that was originally coined in the late part of the 19th century, in that sort of Victorian Edwardian period, where the idea of a clear mind or a well-ordered mind was considered a very desirable thing. But the problem with us in English is that the term mind has a strongly rational connotation. And the term chitta or shin is wider than that. It takes into account very much the emotional life, which for us is perhaps better symbolized by the heart. However, chitta is wider than that too. It's closer to a notion of something being the seat of consciousness, or where consciousness actually arises. And if we go back to one of the early teachings in Buddhism, the teaching of the 18 Dhatu, these 18 Dhatus describe or are a schemata of consciousness, and they represent the 6 fields within which consciousness operates. They're made up of the 6 sense bases. So we have the 5 physical sense bases, obviously the functioning of the eye, ear, nose, tongue, and the body for tactile. The objects of the sense, obviously sights and forms, sounds, smells, tastes, tactile sensations, and so as well, and the allied consciousness, seeing, hearing, touching, tasting, smelling. So those are those make 15, obviously 5 physical senses, but in Buddhism there's a sixth sense as well, and this sixth sense is the organ of mental cognition. It's the organ that perceives consciousness itself, and in particular perceives mental objects. So a mental object would be, for example, a thought. So the sense that perceives the presence of a thought. For example, when we're sitting in meditation, we become carried away by thoughts, and then at some point we become aware that we've just become carried away by thoughts. The organ of mental cognition is that which perceives that mental object, and obviously when we are when mental objects are present, such as thoughts, then we are thinking, and when emotional objects are present, then we are emoting, loving, hating, envying, becoming excited, and so forth. So the presence of these emotional objects are known through that organ of mental cognition as well. And the same, and of course this organ of mental cognition also is perceives the consciousness. So it knows it's seeing, and it knows it's hearing, and it knows it's touching, tasting, and smelling as well. And so this consciousness has a reflective quality about it too, which was analysed a little bit more in the Yogacara arm of the Mahayana teachings. But anyway, for our purposes, keeping it to the original form of the 18 dhatu, we now have 6 senses, 6 sense objects, and 6 allied consciousnesses, which makes our 18. And so this schemata, this 18, if we imagine it as a whole, represents the whole of consciousness, all that of which it is possible to be conscious in the outer life and in the inner life as well. And the Buddha called this the all. A-double-L, the all, and he said that besides this there's nothing else. This is it, this constant flux. And this consciousness in these 6 fields is made up of elements known as dharmas. Now we're used to the term dharma with a capital D, which means the law and also means the inherent nature. It can also, Buddha Dharma, mean the Buddha's teachings as well. But when we see it written with a small d, that convention refers to the micro elements, or the momentary elements that form consciousness. And the various early schools and some of the later schools drafted lists of these dharmic elements, and these lists varied slightly. In some there were 72, and in others there were 75, and there were others that were a little bit different as well. And these, it's almost that it's as if these are the atomic elements that join together to form molecules that form compounds, and the compounds that are produced are phenomena. So for example, when we sit in a room, that's a phenomena. When we experience heat and cold, when we hear a sound, a bell or a car alarm, or voices, these are made up of moments of consciousness, these dharmas. And so these dharmas aggregate together to form heaps or collections, and they form and then we perceive them as distinct, discrete forms, like tables and chairs and voices and birds and so on. And the same goes for the inner world as well. The inner world is also made up of these elements of consciousness. So there's this vast ocean. This all is made up of this vast ocean of consciousness. And this ocean, where it takes place, if we can use that term a little bit loosely, is chitta, is shin, is kokoro, is the heart. So we can see that actually the term chitta, or shin or kokoro, has a very wide and very technical meaning in Buddhism. When we use the term heart, we often mean it in a very personal way, but actually chitta is thoroughly impersonal. It doesn't belong to anyone. In fact, what we can say of it is that all phenomena, including myself, because I'm a phenomenon, and so are you, and our lives are a series of phenomenal images reflected in those 6 sense fields, and collectively known as my life, with my name and my history and my lineage and my cause and effects and so forth. All these things arise in chitta. So it's not that I have a heart and that you have a heart, but that we as phenomena arise in heart, within heart, and that heart, so to speak, comes before. It's our foundation. It's the foundation for all phenomena. So we have to keep that in mind now when we are looking at what is actually being said. A monk asked, "Why does the master say that heart is Buddha?" And the master replied, "To stop the crying of little children." And as has already been said, Master Baso came to his own insight through this phrase, and also brought many of his own followers to insight using it as well. But the problem is the words. As powerful as those words are, and as clearly they had a resonance in his mouth, and also in the mouth of his own teacher, if you repeat something often enough, then we stop hearing it. It's a little bit like if you're sitting in a room and with some fluorescent lighting, and occasionally one of those fluorescent lights, as it's coming towards the end, that it begins to buzz, bzzz, like that. And if you're sort of, say, in a classroom and you've got it, and as soon as you walk into the room you hear it, you're aware of it, and you sit down and you take your books out, and then the lesson starts, and within a very short time that sound disappears out of awareness. It doesn't disappear out of consciousness, of course, because the sound is still reaching the ear and the ear is still picking it up, and in fact the brain is still processing it. It still knows that it's ringing, but it's actually gone out of awareness. And it's a little bit like when a phrase or a saying is said repeatedly. At the beginning it makes an impression on us, but rather in the same way, after a while we stop hearing it, and it stops having that effect and that power. And so quite often then the words have to be scrapped, and some new ones have to be produced, or a new way of making the point has to be brought over. And a little bit this happened with Master Baso. He was so closely associated with this term, heart is Buddha. It was his, so to speak, what they call now the catchphrase. A Master Baso, oh yes, doesn't he teach heart is Buddha? Yes, that's right. Heart is Buddha. Oh, that will be Master Baso. That's his sermon, and so forth. And people just stopped paying attention after a while. So the story goes that one day Master Baso ascended the high seat, and everybody was waiting to hear him say, "Heart is Buddha," and instead he opened his mouth and declared, "Neither heart nor Buddha." And you can imagine there would have probably been a stunned silence, and everybody looked at each other and said, "What? Neither heart nor Buddha? But yesterday you were teaching heart is Buddha, neither heart nor Buddha." And that really sets the cat amongst the pigeons. And all of a sudden now, everyone's got a problem. And Master Baso can retire knowing that it's a job well done. Because, of course, as soon as people have a problem, they feel uncomfortable. They experience that cognitive dissonance, which is always uncomfortable. And that causes them to look a little bit deeper in order to resolve that problem, which is, if Zen is said to have a method, that's probably the closest to it. As Soko Morinaga once said, when a student comes to me, I take a good look at him and find out if he currently has a problem. If he doesn't have a problem, I, as quickly as possible, make sure I can give him one. And then after that, my only task is to make that problem worse and worse and worse until the student has no option but to drop it. And once he's dropped it, that's it. He can go. So there we are in a nutshell. Now we know what this Zen training is actually about. But of course we don't have to go looking for problems in a way. Problems inevitably find us. And why do they find us? Because I, by my nature, I'm always splitting the world into two. I am lopsided. As the Buddha pointed out, we are driven by our attachments, which means that we paint the world in two colours, things that I like and things that I don't like, and I cling to the things that I like, and I fear the things that I don't like, and I fear losing the things I like as well, and I fear being lumbered with the things that I don't like. And so there's always a feeling of anxiety in one way, shape or form, and that makes us lopsided, because the world, well, here we go, big spiritual truth number one: the world doesn't care about my likes and my dislikes. The world is simply as it is, and in Buddhist terms, that sea, that ocean of the six senses with those dharmas, those what the Buddha called the all, in essence is completely impersonal and completely neutral. And this is something quite that's sometimes overlooked in Buddhism in the West, because we're very used to having a loving God and a world that cares for us, and we expect the world to care for us in many ways. And if the world doesn't care for us, then we can even become quite cynical about it. Our relationship to this impersonal world is that we feel that impersonality of the world is something cruel and cold and horrible. And if the world is cruel and cold and horrible, then I also shall be cruel and cold and horrible, because if it won't care about me, why should I care about it? And it can go down that path. And that's actually not, that is an interpretation of the impersonal nature of the world. But it's actually not the Buddhist interpretation. I was surprised many years ago to hear that the great bodhisattvas, like Avalokiteshvara, for example, the great bodhisattva of compassion, Avalokiteshvara is sometimes depicted as having 1,000 arms, like a huge halo is depicted, like this huge halo of arms all the way around 360 degrees, and that this was described, the compassion of Avalokiteshvara was described as being completely impersonal. And this is now a different interpretation of what it means to be impersonal, because Avalokiteshvara's compassion works impersonally, it does not discriminate. It does not say, as my compassion might, well, do I think you deserve my compassion or not? If you deserve my compassion, then I will give it. But if you annoy me or I don't think you deserve it, then you don't. Now that's personal. That is compassional. That has my personal likes and dislikes. There they are again in them. But the compassion of Avalokiteshvara is 360 degrees. All those arms are equal length all the way in all directions. And so even Avalokiteshvara's compassion is impersonal, and so it's a very different interpretation. It's a very different feel to it, doesn't it, from that sort of cold, cynical, impersonal universe that doesn't care about me and so on. It is simply that it's neutral. It's simply that it functions according to its nature. And that is simply how it is. And we often hear this phrase in Buddhism, things as they really are. This is how the world is, tathata, thusness, and so forth. Goes right to the heart of the Buddha's teachings. And so that vast all, that vast impersonalness, so to speak, it doesn't care about my likes and my dislikes, and if I am too wedded to that, to my likes and my dislikes, then sooner or later it's going to fly into the face of the way things really are, And this is why I don't need to go looking for a problem, because sooner or later the world turns, and then the world turns again, and then the world keeps on turning, and sooner or later something's going to come along. Something's going to come along that doesn't suit me, and then there is a reaction against it, and in that reaction then we can work. We can use all the pleasant sounds we like. We can talk about peace and love, and if only we could all stand together, and all this sort of thing. And in my better moments, of course, I feel this. But if I become upset, then I don't feel it. And the more upset I become, the less I care. And the more upset I become, even less do I care. Until it can really tip over then into something quite different, something very dark can emerge from that, as well we know. The thing about the terrible things that happen in the world is that by and large they are committed by ordinary people, but often in extraordinary circumstances. So, having said all that, it's not surprising to find that Zen masters are rather good at producing training grounds that give me a problem. That then, of course, it's my responsibility to begin to work with that, and to begin to bear it, to begin to open up to it, to begin to bear the slings and arrows, those internal slings and arrows of the onslaught of the emotional household, whilst outwardly holding to as good a human form as possible. And this really now is the application of the Buddha's way as remedy. That when it comes to it, we have our precepts, we have our good conduct, and we all know what good conduct is. I mean, we can go and look it up in the books, but I'm pretty certain we're all aware of it, and certainly we should develop a sensibility, because in different circumstances, conduct naturally adapts. But, if we go to a temple, for example, and if we're at home, then our conduct is not going to be exactly the same. But in both places, there will still be good conduct, and that good conduct will reflect that middle way, which is outwardly holding to those good forms, but inwardly fully acknowledging that sometimes I don't feel like it, and and not pretending that I'm other than I am. Oh, I'm a Buddhist now, so I don't get angry, and I'm not impatient, and I speak with a slightly pious voice, and all this sort of thing. We recognize that's pure I putting it on once again, and so we drop that and humbly fold the hands and bow once again, and take a bit of a laugh at ourselves and stop taking ourselves too seriously. So, now, going back to our phrase, the monk asks, why does the master say that heart is Buddha? The master replied, to stop the crying of little children. And who are those little children? Well, that's us, of course. When I don't get my way, wah! And again, it's interesting. In developmental psychology, you can see it. When a newborn baby wants something, there's nothing held back. Wah! It cries out. And of course its needs are met, but as it begins to get a little bit older, it learns to speak, and now it can ask for what it wants, drink or food, or whatever, or a hug. And as it gets a little bit older, it now has to learn to be socialized and learn the social niceties. May I have a drink, please? And with a smile as well, and almost certainly that will get your way. But occasionally something will happen and I don't get my way, and so the young child goes into the kitchen, and there's mum chopping some vegetables, and I see a big shiny knife and say, "Oh, mummy, may I have that knife, please?" Mum says, "No, you can't. It's dangerous. It's not for you." It didn't work. And when the latest thing doesn't work, I regress back to the previous thing that did work. So now the smile has gone, and the please has gone. I want the knife. No, you cannot have the knife. Now that hasn't worked as well. And so we regress back to the first method that always used to get what I wanted. Wah! Heart is Buddha, is the medicine to stop the crying of the little children, and no heart, no Buddha is to cure those people who have become sick because of the medicine. In the end, we remember that when the Buddha came to his own awakening under the Bodhi tree, he continued sitting underneath there because he was faced with that problem too. How do you teach something that passeth beyond understanding, that cannot be conceptualized, that cannot be put into words? Even using words to describe and point at something, which is what of course the Buddhist canon is about, has the problem that we idolatrize it. We begin to worship those words. You know, I call him God, you call him Jehovah, the third one calls him Allah, and we fall to fighting with that. And this happens not just with religious things, it happens with our experience too. And when we come to the matter of the true nature of the heart, which is emptiness, called shunyata, even there we can fall into, and do fall into, great error. So these things are in the end only pointers, and it really requires us to break our bones to see beyond that. And so what to teach someone who is beyond these two? Asked the monk. To him I would say, it is not a thing, replied the master. And with with that phrase, the master takes away everything, takes away all words. It's rather like when a monk asked Master Joshu, does a dog have Buddha nature? Now, this was a new teaching that had come through from the Nirvana Sutra, that all beings were fully endowed with the Buddha nature. And so such a monk comes up and says, does a dog have Buddha nature? He knows what the answer is, really. And Master Joshu knew that he knew, and that he was going to sit back on his knowledge and would not look any further. So rather like saying no heart, no Buddha, Master Joshu replied, "Mo," meaning no. And going against what was clearly written in the sutras, and yet Master Joshu, being a great master, has to be telling the truth as well. So do all beings have Buddha nature? Does a dog have Buddha nature? No. They're both true. They are both true. It is not a thing, replied the master. When suddenly encountering such men, then what? Asked the monk. I would then teach the understanding of the great Tao, answered the master. And here we are in the heart of that Chinese thought. And the Tao and the Dharma very much go together in this sense. This is why Chinese Buddhism was able to take in the Buddha's teachings at the beginning, though it made a few mistakes because it just saw Buddhism as another form of Taoism, which it is not. There are differences. But clearly, and there are some very clear resonances there as well, particularly when it comes to that understanding of nature, Buddha nature or the Tao as well. That Tao, as it says in the Tao Te Ching, the Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao, is not the real Tao. The Buddha that can be named is not the real Buddha either. The nature that can be seen and that can be described is not the real nature. The one that is the foundation on which the edifice of everything that we see, hear, touch, taste, smell and cognize arises. Again, we are back to that heart. Heart is Buddha. But that Buddha is the true body of the Buddha, known as the Dharmakaya. And our path to it, of course, is through our own nature. And this is why it says in the Tao Te Ching a wonderful phrase as to how that whole thing ties together and gives us that inroad now. Because we talked about good forms, and what are those good forms? They're the good human forms, the forms of a good human being that represent our humanity, which to begin with, because we are cut off from the realization of that true nature, our own true human nature, has to come to us from the outside. We read the prescriptive lists, the 5 precepts, and so on. but actually these are merely outward expressions of our inherent nature anyway. And so in that Tao Te Ching, that saying, that verse, that goes, man obeys the laws of earth, earth obeys the laws of heaven, heaven obeys the laws of the Tao, and the Tao obeys its own inherent nature. And so by obeying those laws of earth, by obeying the laws of the situations, in other words, that we find ourselves in, when we truly give ourselves into them, when we truly come to that subtle sensibility of the middle way in all circumstances, we can read it and we can conform to it. In other words, when we obey those laws of earth, then we are simultaneously obeying the laws of heaven, of the Tao, and its and ours, of course, own inherent nature.